next speaker is none other than Laine. For 20 years, as part of NASA's Institute for Advanced Concepts team, Laine pushed space elevator research. Laine is the president of LiftPort Group, focused on the Lunar Space Elevator infrastructure. LiftPort has discovered new alloys and built climbing robotics. Laine's experiences, U.S. Marine, investment advisor, internet entrepreneur, and real estate developer, contribute to his company's efforts. Laine attended Boston University and is the president of the International Space University's U.S. Alumni Association. Please welcome Laine.
Hey, y'all. Thank you very much, everybody, for being a part of this. As always, I really want to shout out to Laila and Tim for creating this thing and creating this venue for everybody to kind of participate in. So thanks for that, for sure. It's been a wild ride. This is only our third one of these. We had a conversation in October that led to a commitment in November, and from idea to execution, it was 3 weeks between when we started it to when we hosted our first event. So yeah, definitely there are training wheels. Definitely it's a little bumpy right now, but we're really seeing some really, I mean, to me, it's a lot of fun to kind of watch the numbers grow, the interest grow, the community develop. We've gone from slightly over 200 people to slightly more than 400 or 500 people this last one. And I don't know what our numbers are going to be on this one, but it is really great to see how things are evolving. So again, to echo Laila's echo of Tim, this can't happen without all of y'all's participation. So thank you. We're going to hear a lot more from the Space Force Association, mostly tomorrow, but I want to put out a special shout out to Bill Wolf and his team for really stepping up. A lot of the content tomorrow is really based on their efforts. So thank you, y'all, for that. Now I'm going to jump in and do some screen sharing here on a topic that we always kick off our events with. So this is now our third one. So it doesn't feel like a tradition quite yet, but thematically what we're trying to do is talk about what happens next. All right. Nobody has a crystal ball, but we are trying to imagine what a near future might look like. So everything that we're doing in Blue Marble Week is really focused in a couple different ways. I call them boxes. So we're boxed between the ground of Earth and the surface of the moon. So this isn't about CGIs of Martian settlement. As much as I might admire SpaceX for their grand vision, that's not what this is about. This isn't about elk in orbit. There's a great picture that that Jeff Bezos and the Blue Origin team post that is an O'Neill cylinder. It's a beautiful O'Neill cylinder. Their vision is millions, potentially eventually billions of people living and working and playing and enjoying their life in space. And they have such a large encompassing vision that they've got O'Neill cylinders floating in the sky with actual herds of elk. Now, that's a great vision. I applaud that, but that's not where we are today. So the other box, all right, so the first box was from the ground of Earth to the surface of the moon and everything in between. And we call that the cis-lunar econosphere. Ken Murphy coined that phrase almost 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and it's really resonated with us. And then the second box that's really important is today's 2021. It's not going to be that long until we hit 2035. You know, Tim talked about some folks on Capitol Hill think space is so far out that it's not relevant to them, right? It's so far out in time that it's not important to them. What we're trying to really get across is that 2022 isn't that far away. 2025 really isn't that far away. And if we act now, we can make next year and 2025 better. And if we do those things, then 2035 is attainable. Like the things that we do now have ripple effects into the near future, right? And so those are the boxes. It's very focused on near term. It's very focused on the cis-lunar econosphere. And what we're trying to do is showcase real world developments that have benefits to those folks down here on the ground. Like, it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to be an astronaut. I mean, maybe, but by the traditional definitions of having the right stuff, I'm not that guy. So, I mean, I know that the definition of the right stuff is changing, so that's great. But even still, the moving humanity en masse into orbit is going to take a while, and it's going to be a lot of hard work. And the third box that we really focus on here is infrastructure development. Now, infrastructure comes in a lot of different flavors. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And as we describe strategic space today and tomorrow, we're going to talk about strategic space in a lot of different flavors. So I'm going to jump into my PowerPoints here in a second, and we're going to just have this as a conversation. But every time we start this Blue Marble Week event, we use this grand architecture idea as a level set for where we are now, where we're going very, very soon. And if we're right, where does that lead us further down the road? So let me just swap gears and change screens here. I can make this full screen and you can see the images better, but I choose not to, because if I do that, I lose all of y'all. So it's actually better for all of us if I don't go to full screen, because I want to be able to see y'all. That kind of like visual feedback is useful to me. So I'm Michael Laine. Thanks, Laila, for the intro. I've been involved with big ideas in space for 20 years. Whether it's focused on the Earth elevator, or over time I switched focus to the lunar elevator. I've worked on space-based solar power. I've been an advisor to some very smart people to kind of map out what the near and the far future looks like. So whether that was as an investment advisor, managing other people's money, using a crystal ball. And I use that term crystal ball very, very generously. I'm being sarcastic when I say that. But I really have built a long career out of trying to understand where we are now and where we're going soon. I'm very easy to find on the internet. Oh, I don't have my LinkedIn profile up there, but that's also super easy to find. So this is what I want us to think about. Now, behind me is the original Blue Marble image. I've had that flag probably more than 10 years, almost certainly, maybe even 15 years. I've had that flag for a long time. It has always meant something to me. It's symbolically, it's powerful to me. But this image also is really important to me. You know, the moon with just the edge of Earth. So I'm going to jump through some of this stuff. If y'all have been with us over the last 2 months, some of this is going to be repeated. I'm going to skip it as fast as I can, but for new folks, I want them to see some of this. So we are fiercely non-political here, but the current document that is in place was issued by the National Space Council a couple months ago, and it focuses on these 5 points: commercialization, going back to the moon to stay, expanding to Mars. I'm really focusing on just the first two, commercialization of LEO and going to the moon soon. 3-star General Kwa says this is one of the most important conversations of our nation's history. He joined us on our first event, which was really great. And we hope soon to have the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force also to kind of talk about the big ideas in space. There definitely is a role of government in all of this. There are plenty of current programs. A lot of potential new programs are in development. That's really what Tim and Laila are working on. And we break infrastructure development kind of into 4 parts: hardware, what are the things we're going to try to build; business, how do you pay for it; outreach; storytelling. Blue Marble Week is an example of us trying to do storytelling; and then framework. We kind of look at all the parts in 4 different areas. I refer to it as ACDC: academic, civil, defense, and commercial. All of these are partners in developing that future. We'll talk more about that later over the next 2 days. As we build out this grand architecture, it will start with launch. And we spent a lot of time last month talking about launch in a lot of different ways. Those videos are available on our YouTube channel. Please check them out. We get better and better at launch. That expands our capabilities for communications and Earth observation. Once we get that, we move to in-space transportation. On our first event, we talked about gas stations and orbital manufacturing. I think that once we're good at that, then we build out the lunar elevator, establish more and more space stations in a lot of different places. We'll talk about location in a minute. As we get better at that, mining and manufacturing will take off using lunar resources. And then we build out space-based solar power systems and bring all that energy from the sun and provide clean, green, limitless energy to everyone, everywhere, all the time. So that's kind of the grand architecture as we see it. Each of these parts are necessary, and you can't really skip steps. All right, so there may be some argument about whether or not the lunar elevator is absolutely necessary. I personally think that it is, but you can't really skip steps in this process. So this is how the future is going to probably unfold. You're going to start with lots of ideas. LiftPort itself, individually, we call ourselves an idea factory, but the idea factory is everywhere around us. There's thousands of space companies out there right now. When I started 20 years ago, that wasn't true. People would have laughed out loud if you said there were thousands of space companies. They work to develop public-private partnerships with government, with industry, and then that establishes infrastructure. So in more refinement, some of the partners are going to be NASA and U.S. Space Force. They're going to build out lunar operations, cargo and orbital logistics, And some of those companies are going to sell stuff. That idea factory is going to sell stuff. And then over time, you're going to get more and more specialization into these various areas. Okay. Back to this big target here. I said a minute ago that we break everything kind of down by academic, civil, defense, and commercial. As you see many of our speakers over the next few days, you're going to see this theme repeat over and over again. But we also are kind of breaking it down a slightly different way when we start talking about strategy. What does strategic space mean? Now, most of the stuff I showed you earlier was preamble from other talks. Now we're going to kind of slow things down a little bit and really focus on when we created the theme of this month and we started talking about strategic space. What does that mean? I mean, we had to have that internal conversation, and then we had it with all of our much beloved speakers to really talk about what does it mean to be, what does strategic space mean? Very obviously, very early on, defense became a natural part of that definition. But it's not the only one. It's not the only one. We at Blue Marble Week and the Foundation for the Future spend a lot of time talking about workforce. Workforce as infrastructure is one of our kind of, I won't say mottos, but we spend a lot of time talking about workforce. We spent a lot of time talking about the industrial base, right? Who is going to build this enormous, cool future that we're going to have someday? So industrial-based conversations, economics, the individual companies, they're building the individual hardware. All of that is a necessary part of this conversation, and it's often ignored or overlooked. That is one of America's strengths here. And for our international friends joining us, please excuse us when we keep referring to this as a nationally focused program, because of the work that Tim and Laila are doing on Capitol Hill. It has to be a national focused program, but we understand that it can't happen without international partners. And when Laila read my bio, she said I was the president of the International Space Universities Alumni Association. I definitely am a globalist when it comes to space stuff. But with respect to this project and this team's efforts on Capitol Hill, we definitely are talking about the American industrial base. Even though I say that, a lot of the conversations last month and the month before really focused on what is happening in our international, on the international scene. Dr. Goswami talked a lot about the Asian perspective on, I think she came up with 9 or 10 different launch systems, an overview of 9 or 10 different launch systems from 9 or 10 different countries. And Julian did the same thing for Europe last month. So this industrial base is a really necessary part of the conversation, because that tells you your starting point, right? That tells you where you're beginning if you're going to go out and build this amazing future. And then the last part, positional, that was an interesting conversation. We're going to talk more about that in a moment, but where are you in space matters, right? You can do different things if you are in different locations and regions. So we usually talk about LEO and GEO, but there's a whole lot of other options out there. So strategy from the strategic space from the perspective of defense, workforce, industrial base, and position. DWIP is not as cool as ACDC as an acronym. I don't expect anybody to remember that. I can't even remember it, but that is what we're thinking about when we talk about strategic space. So if anybody can come up with a better acronym, I would really love to see that. So that would be helpful. So this is a little bit out of date. I was looking for a more recent image, but this tells you a lot about the global perspective in space. By the way, the US number, these are all governmental numbers. It does not bring into account the academic part. It definitely does not account for the commercial sector, and it absolutely, in the American case, not in the other nations, it absolutely does not represent the defense budget. But then if you look at some of the other nations, their entire budget is a defense budget. So as much as I like this chart to show the diversity of the nations going, it is very, very misleading, and there's a lot of nuance that is that's not on this graph. The American number, by the way, is closer to 70 billion all by itself. And although you can't see this little asterisk right here, it actually says that this big blue dot is actually underrepresented, because if you showed the whole thing, it's more than half of the total, right? And so the dot would be much larger. So this is Euroconsult messing with numbers a little bit. But what I'm showing you is that there's a lot of different players in this game we call space now. So the next part is to talk about some wild cards. The United Arab Emirates is definitely a wild card. They, I was about to say land on Mars. They don't land. They start orbiting Mars probably tomorrow. So fingers crossed for those guys. That's amazing. And then China does it, I think, the day after that. And then the United States lands on, I think, the 18th, right? So those things are imminently happening. And there's a heck of a lot going on with the moon as well. So this stuff is happening all the time. And now I said that we were boxed between, the Earth and the moon, but I can't not be happy for the folks going to Mars all of a sudden. So always recognize, people that are pushing the borders here. We talked a bit about the the workforce. Like, it always comes down to, what are you able to do, when are you able to do it, and how do you close the business case? That's true if you are a giant company like Boeing and Lockheed, a pretty good sized company like Blue and SpaceX, or a super small company. And like I said, there's literally thousands of them. So that industrial base really has to think about how they do what they do. But these are the things that they're doing, right? These are the things necessary to build a space infrastructure. You have to be expert in biotech, materials, computing, robotics, communications, and energy. You have to master those things in order to do space at all. And that mastery comes from workforce development. That mastery comes from academic partnerships. And ultimately, it has to get to the industrial base to make this all work. So the last thing we're going to talk about is positional. And that's something I want you to think about in a way that we typically don't. you can do things at LEO that you can't do at GEO. When I started in this field, there was talk about people basically deorbiting things in low Earth orbit and building mammoth superstructures in GEO. That harkens back to the quote unquote inventor of GEO orbit, Arthur C. Clarke. He once posited that you just needed 3 satellites and you could cover everything you ever needed for all of the world. And there was talk about moving that direction. Obviously, that's not what we did. We now de-emphasize GEO and hyper-emphasize LEO because there's only 1,800 GEO slots. And why are there only 1,800 GEO slots? Because they were assigned based on 5 degrees of arc around the world, and each nation was assigned a GEO slot. Those were scarce resources once. Now that's almost trivial. The Lagrange points, the one in between the Earth and the Moon, L1, the one on the far side, L2, 4 and 5 have got a lot of history about them. What are you going to do at these locations? And then finally, the near side versus the far side of the Moon, the top, the North Pole versus the South Pole or the equator of the Moon. And I showed this picture. This is actually a colorized picture of the Moon to show mineral and resource deposits. So where do you want to go on the Moon? This is what we want to build at the Lagrange point, right? We want to build a giant space station at the Lagrange point. We want to sink in at the lunar equator. And there's a whole lot of stuff going to the Moon, and a lot of these have not decided where they're going to go. So that's the end of my time. I am going to swap it over to Laila. Thanks very much, y'all. It's been it's going to be a great next 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you for elaborating on a lot of those things. I think it really summarized everything very well and makes it more actionable for all of us to understand.
Awesome.